ICD welcomes everyone to this evening's lighting design webinar in collaboration with Breathe Architecture. I might just share my screen now and start presenting. And present. So for those joining us for the first time, I'm Michael Alsop. I'm an interior designer and educator at ICD, and I'm also joined by Smita, our ICD course advisor. So the International School of Colour and Design, we're 37 years young, and we've been helping thousands of students reach their creative potential over the years. Lighting design is an essential part of interior design, and we teach the main principles of lighting design in the course. So we teach ambient lighting, task lighting, and accent lighting. As part of ICD's continued passion to connect our school with the design industry, this evening we're lucky enough to be joined by some very special guests from Breathe Architecture as we dive deep into the world of lighting design. So I'd like to introduce our guests now. We've got Bonnie Herring. She's the Director of Architecture from Breathe. We've got Patina Robinson. She's an Associate and Head of Interiors. And we were meant to be joined by Madeline, Head of Houses at Breathe Architecture. However, she's been cut off from communication. So she lives in the bush, and the wild weather has interrupted their internet and power, which is a little bit hard to run a webinar. So I'm sure we'll make do without her. So throughout the presentation, feel free to pop in any of your questions into the chat box on the side. And Smita will collate those questions throughout the presentation, and we'll endeavour to answer them all at the end of the webinar in a Q&A session. Just to make sure, in the little tab in the little Q&A, there's a little tab that you can press, and just make sure it's selected all panelists and all attendees. So that way we can see all of the questions come through. So I think that's it from me. So I might as well hand it over to the lovely ladies now who will take it away.
Thanks, Michael. I'd like to first start with an acknowledgement, acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the traditional custodians on the land on which Breathe stands. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and would like to extend that respect to First Nations peoples from other communities who might be joining us here today. We acknowledge their continued and unceded connection to country and culture. And in considering our discussion about lighting this evening, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge also that the impact of climate change, construction, and light pollution disproportionately affect First Nations people and their connection to culture, country, celestial and ecological systems. Next slide. I'd also like to thank the ISDC team for the opportunity to talk to you all about Breathe's approach to lighting design. Thanks all for the time tonight. It's a tricky time of the evening for families, so I appreciate that you're all joining us. I think we've got 150 participants at the moment. No pressure. So let's jump in. I'm Bonnie Herring, a Director of Architecture at Breathe, and joining me is the incredible Patina Robinson, who is an Associate and heads our Interiors team. Madeline is also pictured here, but unfortunately, she sends her apologies. She'd love to be with us, but couldn't make it, thanks to our wild weather. Next slide. So Breathe undertakes a really interesting mix of projects, including individual homes, multi-residential housing, commercial, hospitality, and some community-based interventions and advocacy projects. Most recently, you may have come across us through our association with the Nightingale Housing Revolution, as we were both instigators and of the development initiative and the architects of their first project, Nightingale 1, which we'll discuss in brief tonight. Next slide. We have a record of delivering award-winning examples in each of these building topologies across our 20-year practice history. Next slide. And Breathe's mission is is really to design a holistic from a holistic sustainability perspective, reconciling ecological and social impacts within our current economic climate. We're a values-based organisation that prioritises ethics, tenacity, innovation, strategy, accountability, and the beauty of imperfection. Next slide. Importantly, we need to take a moment. We're all in the midst of a climate and biodiversity crisis, and the impact of the building and construction industry is significant on that. And from this context, all of us need to recognise that our design decisions matter, even in lighting specification. Next slide. So we're going to take you through our design approach. Next slide. Next slide, our specification and detailing strategies. And next slide, how we can use light to connect us to the natural world. Patina is up first, and then we've divided Madeline's slides, so hopefully we'll do them justice. Patina, over to you.
Thanks, Bonnie. Hello, everyone. Sorry, my name is Patina. I first studied interior architecture at Monash University and then followed up to complete my studies in Masters of Architecture at Melbourne University. I've been with Breathe since 2012, where I've been able to pursue my interest and passion in materials and spatial planning, leading me to the role of Head of Interiors now. And next slide. At Breathe, we design by a fundamental rule of build less, give more. So the most sustainable building is no building at all. So as our role as architects, by way of material reduction, we seek to implement an ideology of simplicity. So for every material or product we add to a building, we ask 5 questions. Next slide. And next slide again. So why, what, where, who, value, and then we reflect. So through the lens of lighting, I'd like to talk to you about how the design process applies to lighting specification. Next slide. So firstly, why? So as a designer, ask yourself the question, is a product required here at all? If you don't need it, then take it out. So for obvious reasons, we need lighting to make a building habitable, but can we do better to reduce the superficial product consumption, including the over-specification of light fixtures? So the things that we think about, what does the lighting need to do? What is the minimum performance requirements? Is there a feasible way to reduce or design out the need for lighting at all? Can the lighting achieve more than one purpose? Can the lighting be left to the end user or later occupants? In this image that you see here, so this is the ceiling in the entry foyer of Nightingale 1. The ceiling lining is being removed. A single cable tray, which you see on the right, consolidates a number of services on a platform that is accessible for ongoing maintenance, and is an efficient, low-cost downlight is mounted off the side of the cable tray, providing the light to the circulation. This is a strategy that we've learned to love, and we've adopted it across a number of projects. And just everything in this entry here is scrutinised, and in the end, you still get a beautiful result. Next slide.
The electrician would love you.
That's the thing. You've then got to curate it beautifully. So your ceiling plans can be one of your most complicated drawings.
Yeah, great.
And you've got to find the right electrician. So the next question, what? Examine what raw properties the product consumes from cradle to grave. So at Breathe, we target carbon neutrality and prioritise materials that have a minimal environmental impact. So again, some of the questions that we ask. do the materials consumed by the manufacturing process, installation, and ongoing maintenance come from renewable sources? Can the fixture be installed for future adaptation, disassembly, or reuse? Is the ongoing power consumption of the fixture as low as possible? And does the fixture have low ongoing maintenance requirements? What is the lifespan of the bulb? Can it be easily replaced? These are some of the things you can look at. So lighting fixtures may seem like a relatively small component in buildings. However, if you think about the impact of the industry as a whole, it's large. So markets are fed by consumers. So if designers ask for lighting fixtures that are sustainable from cradle to grave, you have the ability to change the market. It doesn't have to be led the other way around. So at Breathe, we're currently seeking out light fixtures with above average amounts of recycled aluminium. So you can see in this image here, this is a pile of scrap aluminium, which is one small move it pushes that recycling sector to take the aluminium out of buildings that have been demolished. And then it's pushing the manufacturing of suppliers to use that material. So it's you've got to ask the questions and we can start to make the change. Next slide. So examine who is supplying the product to ensure they have a genuine commitment to sustainability. Get to know your lighting suppliers. Learn about their practices and policies and ensure they're long game players enthusiastic about achieving high quality outcomes. Oh,
was this the who?
Sorry, I've gone past the slide.
That's all right.
And we can go back to it.
Shall I go back to the other one?
We'll continue with who.
Yeah, we'll continue this one and we'll go back to the other one.
So does the lighting supplier have any written environmental policies in place? Do they have a pledge that they want to be carbon neutral by a certain time? Is their practice carbon neutral? Do they have warranties which assure the quality and durability of their product? Something you should always look for when specifying a product. Do they provide design services to ensure the best built outcome? Do they provide support services for the ongoing maintenance to prolong the life of their fixtures? And is the company innovative and actively striving to exceed environmental standards and norms of the industry in which they operate? So we'll go back to where. So this is about assessing where the material is sourced and manufactured. So we prioritise materials that are locally sourced from sustainable and ethical practices. Or we do our best to strive to see that point, or we find the best alternative suitable. So are the materials which make up the light fixture selected from the closest, most sustainable, ethical source to the project site? Does the companies involved in the raw extraction and manufacturing foster an ethical working environment? And does specifying the light fixture support the local economy? So if we're getting materials that have been manufactured and sourced locally, there's more transparency in knowing how they're made, what the work conditions are like. But you can trace those questions no matter through different warranties or certifications of that practice as a valid point to knowing that they're doing what they're saying. So let's skip 2 slides to value. So assess if the product adds appropriate value to the project. So we believe lighting specification should be about humanity and functionality rather than desire. This is not to say decorative lighting has no place in design, but the value of it should be scrutinised. So particularly in a market like lighting, decorative lighting, it floods the market. And so still think about the core reasons for why you're putting that light in that space. So will the light fixture exceed trends and be appreciated and retained by its users to the end of its practical life? Is the light fixture a practical choice for the buildability and longevity of the project? Has the lighting been specified to best utilise its product capabilities? And does the lighting respond appropriately to the site and bring delight to its users and surrounding community?
I think that's really important, actually, because sometimes as designers, looking at the lights which are available, it's almost like a candy store of like beautiful lights, and you kind of want to throw every single light into a project. So I think that's a really good point. Like, you still have to have lights in a building, but perhaps curate it a little bit more, really assess the value of it, and rule out the ones which are just, bit of fluff.
Yeah,
For lack of a better word.
Trends in lighting are very strong. Like, you will see the repetition of things that circulate year to the next year to the next year.
Yeah.
And it's really about seeing through that and understanding how that light works in that space for that building, and will that give that longevity.
Yeah.
So the example in this picture is Brick and Gable House, which a residential project that we did. So this decorative light is expensive and it's imported, but it holds worthwhile value to the client, and that's why it's in this project. So the family lived in Copenhagen, and bringing Scandinavian design into their home was a warm reminder of this time. Being a vintage light design, it's arguably a timeless design, and so hopefully its life in this building will last for this family, but then maybe even be recycled and valued further on in its life. So lastly, reflect. Next slide. So we need to reflect and share our experience as designers, not hold closed books, and not be secretive about potential mistakes or wins that we make. So this is the best way we can learn and develop. We share with our team, colleagues and consultants where we've had unexpected problems on site, how much the builder just hated installing that light fixture. So we don't do that again. How we realised we could have done things better, and how the light is performing, and so on. So the example here is Paramount Hotel. So in this project, we've scrutinised the need of every single light fixture with the means of reducing ongoing power consumption. As we knew, a typical hotel guest, when they're on holidays, they'll give very little thought to how much power they're consuming. So in this instance, for the vanity mirror, we installed this ball light. We had our doubts about it, but we had also success in it in single residential projects. It was sufficient amount of light, and it provided good task lighting at the basin. But we sort of fleshed it out and realised that we had to be more open-minded with the clientele for a hotel, because we didn't know who the user was. We needed to engage to a wider audience. And so after installing the vanities with this single ball light, we ended up installing an additional light overhead to have the option for people that need more light at a vanity. So it was a lesson learned on how lighting levels can be different for different markets and different building types.
And I guess that's a nice approach, instead of almost erring on the side of caution a little bit. So like, let's go in there with the more pared back approach. And then we went in there, it's like, oh, actually, we do need an extra light. Whereas if you started with, the 4 or 5 lights, then you've already started at that level. So you can always build, but it's hard to take it away.
Yeah, and in some instances it worked. In the suite, it has very little lighting. There's one that will sit over an area where there's a table and then your bedside lamps, and then that's about it. Because again, we thought, how much light do you actually need? Where do you need it? Generally, being in a hotel is about relaxation and retreat, and so over lighting spaces is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, it balanced out in the end.
Yeah, perfect.
So now next slide. I'd like to talk to you about Transformer and demonstrate how this process one of the projects where it sort of has come together. So this project was the rebirth of an existing Transformer warehouse into a restaurant. And so for this, we needed to design the following light conditions. We needed external wayfinding to the laneway entry, soft ambient lighting to create a relaxed environment for guests, path lighting to the kitchen and bar, and lighting over dining tables to make the vibrant vegetarian food pop. And so guests can easily read their menus. So restaurant fit outs have a relatively short lifespan in comparison to, say, residential projects. And so what we thought we would retain significance over the time was the existing building as opposed to our fit out of this restaurant. So our approach to the design was to intervene with the existing building as little as possible. So no new walls or joinery touched the existing wall, and the skin of the existing warehouse was left in its natural condition as much as possible. So ambient lighting was applied through energy efficient LED strips contained in, so I think we go to maybe the second image, which this one, yeah, that one's good. And that's Madeline sitting there, so she can do it. So you can see here the LED, so it was fixed along the underside of the existing steel truss in a steel channel with screw fixings. And then next slide, there we pin mounted steel profiles to either side of the brick piers. So the vertical lights along the back wall there. So in another life, the lighting can be removed, leaving nothing more than a few screw holes. We had to play around. There was a lot of trial and errors we were putting these in on site on the warmth of the light, and to be able to make them function to dim really well, get them all syncing together. It was quite tricky, but I'm sure LED technology is probably a bit better now. But it was so important to get that light right, because ambient lighting is really important in creating the right mood for a dining space.
Especially for a dining experience as well.
So and also throughout the day, bring that light from the day into the night, and to the different weather conditions, if the space is being used as a function space or its natural dining space, it was definitely important to have that control. So then also in this project, the Devil's Ivy has thrived. Oh, I skipped a bit here. Now, the Devil's Ivy, which is growing up the screens which divide the spaces, has thrived for two reasons. One, good irrigation, and two, for natural daylighting. So in this instance, we're actually able to add skylights above each of the planted screens to make those plants want to grow up towards the ceiling. And Bonnie will talk more about the importance of lights to plants in her talk. And then I'll go next slide. The client had a long history in hospitality, and he taught us a great deal about lighting food and lighting a table. That's a really simple thing, and how important it was. So he was adamant that every table must have a spotlight, and be positioned that it doesn't provide glare to the people sitting around the table. So we worked with a local artist, David Murray, who created the arch steel light, which provided a spot perfectly placed over every table. So these were made from mild steel and fitted with a changeable LED globe. And as you can see from the photo, next slide, next one, you can see how well he executed that with the glow on the table and no glare on the occupants' faces. Next slide. You see the beautiful, colourful food. Next slide. The kitchen and the bar was contained in a standalone pod, clad in recycled timber with a black stain. And so to reduce the light spill from these task-based zones with high light levels, a small slot window was made into the bar and the kitchen parts. And the contrast from the black cladding draws your eye into the box, which we wanted to emphasize the activity in the kitchen and the bar, but without bleeding the light and impacting the ambient light in the rest of the dining space. And then lastly, next slide, the small courtyard out the back was lit, knowing that for most part of the year in Melbourne, like now, it's freezing if you're in Melbourne, that this space would not be occupied at night. So the lighting was designed to create a view from inside out and to enhance the garden view and to spotlight the seasonal planting, so the vine and the tree in the centre, which spoke to the seasonal menu that they provide. So now it's hand over, this is Maddie's part, I'll go next slide, which Bonnie will start and I'll tail in at the back.
Oh, thanks, Patina.
Great. For those who missed it earlier, my name's Bonnie. I'm Bonnie Herring from Breathe. I studied environmental design and Masters of Architecture at UTAS, University of Tasmania, and have been at Breathe for more than a decade, working on some interesting but challenging housing and commercial projects, some with Patina, which have been great, like the Commons, QV8, Paramount House Hotel, and Market Garden. And I now work as sustainability lead. I'll see what I can do to look after Madeline's slides in her absence.
You're different.
So next slide. Patina's taken us through the Breathe approach to material specification. But one of our key mantras is, if you don't need it, take it out. Build less, give more. An example of this in our multi-res work is not having building ceilings, or not building ceilings, as Patina mentioned, which are an additional layer of structure and plasterboard. So instead we let the concrete soffit, which is also structural, be exposed. It's organic, imperfect, and requires less embodied carbon. Next slide. In addition to having exposed concrete soffits, we also have exposed surfaces. Typically in high-end projects where concrete soffits are exposed, surfaces are cast into the concrete slab. I think we might have, can we go back one just because?
That shows surfaces in concrete.
Yeah, so this is actually handy. So that's showing a not cast in conduit. So yeah, typically in high-end projects, where concrete soffits are exposed, surfaces are cast in, which means they have to put a plastic conduit and junction box in the concrete while they're pouring it. So it's extra coordination, but it conceals the wiring to the fixture. Though it ends up looking effortless, it does actually require tremendous effort and is completely inflexible. It's also quite expensive. So when you cast the conduits into the concrete, they're immovable and the light locations are permanent. We're also conscious to avoid materials that are dangerous to human and environmental health. So we avoid PVC as much as we can and specify PVC-free cabling and conduit. Next slide.
And I guess having the services almost on the outer skin rather than the inside, it does allow flexibility down, in the future. We looked at that previous project of, that transformer, which turned into a restaurant, and you're not really touching anything other than the envelope. And it's like kind of like this as well. Like you could remove these services if you needed to and put a whole new program in this building if you needed to.
100%. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
Because that flexibility just is more sustainable in its
Yeah.
That's our strategy. So next slide. Accessibility. So instead we expose all of our lighting cabling and let it be expressed. We let it articulate our quite raw form, and it becomes the ornament, particularly in this project in that last image. It makes the lighting in each apartment customizable after the fact, because we recognize that lighting is personal and not every resident will want exactly the same light fixtures and layout. So exposing the cabling means that when a resident moves in, they can easily make alterations without having to cut into the concrete slab. And this is actually my apartment. And you can't see right up to the ceiling, but ultimately the pendant over the table is something that, my partner and I could select once we moved in and install ourselves, rather than, doing something that would require huge patching and unsightly kind of outcomes.
Yeah, beautiful.
Next slide.
Is that a little window seat there or something in the end? What's in the end there?
Yeah, Breathe has sort of developed this kitchen module that is sort of a linear kitchen module that incorporates all of the wet area, but then it divides and becomes usually like an AV area. But in the configuration that we have here, it's actually more, for us, it's our home kind of record location.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah, but that's another wonderful way each resident can make it their own, Here they could make it your AV, your record station.
Personalize whatever they were into,
Giant plants.
Gaming, it could be.
Blanket seat. It's perfect height for seating.
Yeah.
Love
that idea.
Next slide, thank you. So we recognise that our families need change over time as well. So perhaps your spare room starts as a study, then becomes a nursery, ends up being a home gym or a hobby room. So each of these rooms have different lighting conditions, or lighting requirements rather. And so one strategy we use to ensure flexibility in that future-proofing is to anticipate the change of use by providing extra lengths of flex, so that as the purpose changes, you can move the fitting around to relocate the light source. And this one was actually even more flexible because they were plug-in bases, meaning you could actually pull it out from the wall and locate it somewhere entirely different.
Great idea.
Next slide. So another thing we think a lot about with our lighting installation is how to manage energy consumption. That's something that Patina spoke a little bit about earlier. Next slide. In all of our projects, we use a kill switch, which is just sort of a regular looking kill switch or located by the front door that cuts the power to all the lights and power points as you leave the house. So it eliminates ghost or phantom loads that happen when the baseload power is delivered to your appliances and your lights when they're plugged in but not on. And using motion sensors is another way, like these kill switches, that is really effective at managing energy consumption, particularly in commercial buildings and outdoor areas where the lights are, only in use when needed. It's the same with, Patina mentioned Paramount House Hotel, you can manage that load again by using quite smart sensors to try and avoid. So it's, sorry, you're going to say?
Yeah. I 100% agree, because it's like, you can have hallway lights on these commercial properties or in hotels, and there's no one in the hallways for hours and hours on end. So I can imagine that type of technology really working in those types of spaces.
Absolutely. Next slide. Dimmers are another thing that helps us manage energy consumption and is only using the light to the level that you need it. You can set up lighting scenes, so you have task lighting during the day and then mood lighting at night. There are now even on the market, you can get light bulbs that allow you to put it into any fixture to become dimmable so that they can be retrofitted without getting an electrician in. So some dimmable light bulbs even use less energy on their lower settings. Next slide, and I think Patina will take this section from here.
Thanks, Dawn. So if there's nothing in the market, we DIY. So many light fixtures are high in embodied energy because they are fabricated through an energy-intensive manufacturing process. They're made from metal alloys or various materials, making separating and recycling difficult. They're powder-coated in high temperatures. They are made overseas and imported to Australia. And with many LED fixtures, you can't simply replace the bulb in the fixture, and so the entire fixture needs replacing, adding the environmental cost of replacing it. So for one at Breathe, we don't specify any lights where the bulb can't be replaced. There's just no need to make that choice. On the next slide. Oh, I'm missing a picture. I'll go back one. The picture earlier on, which was the pile of aluminium waste.
Yeah.
So unlike plastics, the beauty of aluminium and steel is that it's infinitively recyclable. So like I mentioned earlier, we're working with a lighting supplier to develop a light fixture that's higher than average in recycled aluminium content, and also that it has no finishing coating on it. Similar in that approach that we do to tapware at Breathe, where tapware is a raw brass fixture and it's applied with a coating. So that coating, whether it's chrome or electroplating or any other form, requires energy. It's not going to last forever. And in the case of chrome, the chemicals used and the output of that process is really damaging. So we took the similar approach to lights. Why do we need to coat them in a black powder coat or something that is purely superficial when they can be made of materials that are beautiful in their raw properties? So by leaving raw aluminium, it will oxidize over time, and just like the patina of copper or brass when it's left in its raw state. And we think there is an inherent beauty and honesty in the natural aging of a material. So we take advantage of that natural aging. Next one. So this wall light here is a custom wall light, which we made from thinking about what a light fixture needs to be. So a wall light, you need to house a globe on the wall. How can we do it in a really simple way? So the fabrication of this is simple as cutting a steel angle profile to length. Components are easy to disassemble and sort for future recycling or for maintenance or to fix this. It isn't painted or powder coated. The bulb is easily replaced by any person, not a professional. And we started having our builders make this light themselves on site, but we're looking to have this fabricated locally to standardise the production, make it readily available and affordable option for all projects. So this will be coming up in a Breathe lighting range. So
that's cool.
Exciting. Next slide. This is a pendant light detail that we created. So in similar, it's a solid piece of PFC and with a linear strip light to the underside. It's connected to the ceiling with a simple threaded rod fixing. So these are all standard components that have been modified with very little intervention. Next slide. And similar, this is a pendant light from a residential project warehouse greenhouse, and it was made from a steel section that was salvaged from the original warehouse truss. And this provides a nice local narrative to the homeowner as well. So they'll cherish this for its life, hopefully. Next slide. And then combining LED lighting into architectural features such as joinery that already exist in the project is another good way to provide light without the embodied energy of adding another fixture to house that light source. So providing light specifically to a task area can reduce the number of fixtures and energy usage in a space. So to illuminate the stair treads here for safety, an LED was added to the stair structure, and then to illuminate the kitchen bench, lighting to the underside of the overhead cabinets. So in both instances, you didn't have to fill the ceiling full of lights and light the entire space to achieve the task that you needed.
And they can be integrated during the design phase or even post, really quite simply as well, which is really beneficial, especially if you're doing renovations or once again DIY yourself at home. You can add those strip lights quite easily. Yeah,
definitely. And they also improve the ambient lighting in a space. Yeah. Again, in a residential home, you don't always want all your lights on, even Absolutely. If someone is cooking. Someone can be relaxing in the living room, and you don't want to be living in a fish tank.
Yeah, exactly. And especially with home designs now with, spaces connected, we have to be really smart how we use a space.
Yeah.
Having someone watching TV next to you, you don't really want all the ceiling lights on anyway, if someone's just cooking. So having that strip light, that task on just that person, is a really great solution.
And last slide. So ethics before aesthetics. So again, back to the principles. At the end of the day, with every decision we make, we challenge ourselves to put ethics over aesthetics. Not to say you can't achieve a great aesthetic, but always questioning back to those original principles. And now I'll hand back to Bonnie to talk about connection to nature.
Thanks, Patina. So I'd like to talk to you all about the balance between natural and artificial lighting and how you can use both to better connect to the natural environment. Next slide. Passive design. It's one way to limit environmental impact, reducing energy consumption. So using passive design principles to increase access to daylight and at the same time improve thermal comfort. This means responding to the site and to the climate by getting the orientation right. Designing shading to reduce heat gain in summer or to draw in that low winter sun. This image is from Spectrum Way, one of Madeline's projects, and is a home with a west-facing brise-soleil that shades circulation, moderates light and weather, but without cutting you off from it. Next slide. By curating openings for daylight and passive ventilation while making the envelope tight and tough, we can reduce our building's reliance on artificial lighting alongside active heating and cooling systems. So from the outset, our work looks to connect to our climate and to the natural world. Next slide. As Patina's already discussed, each task or architectural feature does need a certain level of light. It sounds obvious, but if you're not designing light-sensitive spaces like galleries or dark rooms, as a rule of thumb for both visual comfort and energy efficiency, it's best to prioritize access to natural daylight for as many hours as possible. Next slide. Tapping into that very human innate love of the natural environment, biophilic design can support health, well-being, and performance. It's the proven concept that just by seeing the ferns beyond in the office here, or by offering a sensory experience of natural materials like this timber benchtop or the imperfect concrete slab, they all have positive psychological and physiological impacts. Biophilia is known to reduce heart rate, instance of hypertension, headaches, improve cognition and short-term memory. It even reduces workplace absences, which is a key consideration for your commercial clients' staff retention and productivity rates. And next slide. And this is all the more relevant now, of course, that we're spending 90% of our time indoors, even before COVID. And that means a healthy internal environment is critical to our well-being. Next slide. So understanding all of this, we can use artificial lighting to mimic the functions of natural daylight when it's simply not available to us, enhancing our connection to nature whilst indoors. Enriching an office with plants like Slack's Asia Pacific HQ, which is shown here in Melbourne, is proven to improve air quality, make staff happier, and boost performance and motivation by up to 15% in some accounts. Next slide. So along with these notable cognitive and economic benefits, the inclusion of plants also has a positive impact on business perception, which is something worth capitalizing on. So how do we make real plants thrive inside? Next slide. So here's a few things to consider. Let's first look at spectrum. Next slide. So plants absorb light and turn it into energy via chlorophyll, shown in this fancy graph. This chemical reaction, which is photosynthesis, allows plants to flourish or survive, depending on or flourish or just survive, barely hanging on, depending on the spectrum and density of the available light. And the spectral needs actually change as the plant grows and blooms, and also depends a bit on what you're growing. To preface this, we're not horticulturalists or lighting specialists, but as a starting point, we know that there's a range of light that plants predominantly use for photosynthesis, and it's called PAR. It's on this graph, it ranges between 400 to 700 nanometers, from red to blue to green and beyond. In architecture and interiors, we usually just talk about how warm or how cool the light is in color temperature, rather than frequency or wavelength. But PAR extends beyond visible light. So thinking in Kelvin, this warm or cool color temperatures doesn't really cut it if you want your plants to do more than suffer a slow death. Next slide. So next, we have to talk about pest tolerant species. It's key, like this devil's ivy in the breeze offices. Though even the hardiest of plants can still be susceptible to pests if they're not properly managed. Clients need to be involved during the design process and engaged operationally to monitor plant health. Depending on how substantial or costly the plant installation is in your design, you might want to consider getting an expert to do a daylighting or plant mortality analysis to manage expectations. Next slide. If we know when the plants need that they need a certain quality of light, how much do we give them and when? We can start by recognizing that, like us, they need a period of complete darkness for a healthy rest cycle. Lighting schedules should then mimic that circadian rhythm of night and day, with some adjustments to achieve appropriate exposures to light for photosynthesis. So I'll take you through some case studies in a moment to help illustrate this, including Paramount House, shown here in a nice pink glow. Next slide. Finally, location or proximity to the light source, or of the light source to the plants themselves. Ideally, there'd be some daylight spilling in from the sides to offset the spectrum shortfall of artificial lighting, like here at OI, OI offices. But if not, I'd be specifying horticultural fixtures, which are controlled spectrum lighting designed for greenhouses and other high-yielding farming applications. In those instances, the distribution of fixtures and density of light output is important. The fitting needs to be at the right height to provide adequate beam spread to the foliage, and it might mean that the fitting has to adjust in height as the plant establishes and grows. Alternatively, you can rotate plants for intermittent exposure to the sun, which might work just fine in small installations. Next slide. I'll take you through some case studies now. Here at Slack HQ in Melbourne, we had a really deep floor plate, which had virtually no access to daylight. Recommended them not to get this tenancy before they did. But to provide a productive biophilic connection, the outdoors that you couldn't actually see, we created an internal forest using horticultural grow lights. I think you can just see them at the top of the screen. They're really small. Yeah, they're not on, so it's hard to read, but there is a series of light in a linear extrusion. So when everyone's gone home over 12 hours at night, the office is flooded in a red, blue, pink light. It's a pink plant disco. So over time and with careful maintenance.
So excuse my ignorance, is it actually like a blue light?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, it really it does actually just depend on the plants. You can get things that look a little bit more white or kind of cool white. Okay. But ultimately, they tend to be a mix of red and blue. There's some green as well. Wow. Just imagine, like in this particular instance, we've got a series, it's a linear strip or a linear extrusion that has just the LEDs all the way along, but there's red, blue, red, blue. So it spills out and it becomes pink. Yeah. Pink and purple. Oh, wow. Yeah, which is pretty incredible. That's, it's something that in this instance we scheduled so that it would occur when people weren't in the office. It's probably not a super productive work environment to be bathed in pink, but it works elsewhere. And you know, you can get broader spectrum that cover off on more of the white lights. So it's a sort of different view. But yeah, in this instance as well, over time and with careful maintenance, we've actually tested the different species in here, which have strengthened over time, have been swapped out and changed to create a more resilient internal habitat. So next slide will take you to Slack's San Fran office, where we filled key congregation points with plants, washing them with an ambient warm light and supplemented again with broad spectrum grow lights where daylight wasn't available. So interestingly, the 3000 Kelvin, which is that warm ambient light that you tend to put in most applications architecturally, but certainly like the transformer Fitzroy that Patina showed you, remember that warm light? It does actually overlap with the photosynthetic spectrum, but it doesn't fully nourish the plants for the long term. So you've still got to really look after them in that instance. And on the next slide, we've got Paramount House Hotel in Surrey Hills. Patina also mentioned this project earlier. And here we have internal planting in the entrance lobby that offers a fatigued traveller a sense of relief and respite after the flurry of arrivals and check-in. We furnished each suite with fiddle leaf figs, ivy and palms to connect our travellers with climate and place through vegetation. So using horticultural lighting in that lobby gave us the flexibility of planting options over time, while in the suites we had a pot plant rotation and maintenance strategy. And earlier I mentioned or showed another image of the lobby which was bathed in, it can be quite an intense pink light depending on how you're scheduling your grow lights. It mightn't suit many applications, but Here we thought having the night shift on a photosynthetic schedule would be a playful point of identity.
Yeah.
Next slide, just the final case study is Nightingale 1 in Brunswick, Victoria. We had various internal planting installations that punctuate the journey home. It's a moment of stress release and renewal, where we've used a combination of strip lighting under the seat there and variable height red-blue grow lights just next to Marie's head there. You can just see a linear extrusion that is variable height, so you can get it closer to the plants.
Right.
We've also got some more intense full spectrum grow lights in the fern garden beside the stair there. But nature keeps us guessing though, and we keep testing and trialing different options. Speaking of prototyping, we're also currently developing our own grow lights for the Breathe lighting collection, so keep an eye out. Next slide. So thanks all for joining us.
Yeah, I think that's
Breathe
that was absolutely amazing, guys. The projects you worked on are incredible, and the layers that you have to go into for design, there's so many layers, but lighting is such an important thing. It sets such a mood. You know, it helps you complete tasks, and now looking at plants indoors, you know, it's really, really important. So I'm sure there's lots of questions. So I might bring Smita back in. Smita, are you there?
Yeah. Hi guys, great presentation. Yeah, really good. Love the presentation. Lots of good questions and comments here. Good ones. Ready to jump right in?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I'll pick out. So there's the biggest question we had was from Kavi. Thank you, Kavi. Why is there so much reluctance from builders and architects to embrace technology with smart lighting? I.e. voice control, integration with Amazon's Alexa, Google, or even control via native apps on devices. It seems the focus is still on the old-fashioned type of manual light switch operation, rather than to retrofit smart bulbs or smart switches. Yeah. Who wants to cover that?
I could start on that point by, I guess it's longevity and simplicity as well. So making something simple to install, and not saying those smart technologies aren't that simple, but questioning how long that technology lasts for. So I think it's definitely something that as we get smarter and smarter about it, and it is more integrated into a lot more people's everyday life. So currently a lot of people don't use that technology. So if you think about residential design and say an elderly person moves into that space, they might really struggle to adapt to that technology, which something like a standard switch is still something that everybody can use. But I think as things become more wireless, that's a really smart way to go, because it is simplifying the building process and the adaptability of a space. So it's definitely a space we're looking at. We're just not quite comfortable. We're not quite there yet. Bonnie, did we?
I'm not sure I've got that much to add. I think, you want to create a robust design solution that's going to suit most people. So in multi-residential applications, we've not found it appropriate to investigate thus far. I'm not saying we won't, definitely interested. I think it also just depends on the client. So in other projects, commercial applications, I can see that being really appropriate. But it's got to be user-proof when there's multiple users involved. But yeah, it comes down to client interest as well, interest and engagement.
Perfect. Right, so one of the early questions we had was just about the who section, Patina, when you were going through the different points there. If you could go through that in more detail, Susie would love to hear that again.
Yeah, so who is about the supplier or the manufacturer. So not necessarily the raw material extraction, which is where the material is coming from. So if you think about timber, it's where is that timber getting logged, under what practices and ethics is that getting logged. The where, the who is then about who is taking and making that material into something else. So there's different ethics it's a different process, a part of the product's life, and so distinguishing those two as separate things, or it's just you have to look at every stage. So the who is about how that practice is producing something. So are they manufacturing, is the way that they work ethical? How do they treat their workers? What are they selling to you? Are they selling you something that's genuine and has a long life and is good quality? And that they're a trustworthy supplier to work with. It definitely comes, sustainability comes back to longevity. So knowing that in detail, doing the research is worthwhile.
Yeah. Thanks, Patina. I just want to say these are not questions, but there's tons of comments coming through about how beautiful and simply beautiful, insightful your projects, your presentation projects are. So thank you, Susie, for your question. The next one was from Fiona and Gillian Rose about your Paramount Hotel bathroom, just about the lighting on the mirror. The question was why you didn't have lighting from the mirror angle for makeup. Just wanting to know what your thought process was behind that. Yeah.
So we had a light installed above, and then the one on the mirror projecting light onto your face. And it was not so much the projection of light from the bulb on the mirror onto your face that wasn't casting enough light. The light coming from above wasn't a strong enough source, particularly in quite a dark, moody interior. The contrast was quite high. So for someone who is really detailed with their makeup and wants to see every nook and cranny, that lighting, their preference is for lighting that is much higher than an average person. So
again, it comes to the height.
We had to
find a middle ground somewhere.
and someone who doesn't even want to really look in the mirror. So yeah.
But bathroom lighting is something that is gotten wrong time and time again. Technically you really need the light source to be above the plug hole, but often you've got cabinetry in front and it makes it really tricky to actually install it and make it appropriate. And even actually getting an even light source, having the circular light in front of your face is actually really wonderful, but it's not necessarily evenly placed on your face. So, one side's going to shade the other. So it's a very personal discussion, but one that's so frequently gotten wrong. So it's worth having.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, next question from Dilmini. What is your process of incorporating daylight and orientation to the total lighting design?
The total lighting design. Well, I guess, from first principles when we're setting up designing our concept for our layout or for our projects, we're trying to capitalize on our site. Where are we located? Is there shade? Is there light access that we can orient toward? So firstly, putting all of our most the rooms that are inhabited most often during the day, so your living spaces, sort of the more public side of your home, aligning those toward north in this southern hemisphere so we can get as much light across the floor plan. You know, it really is going to depend on your topology and your site, but just being able to balance natural lighting into all spaces. I mean, in really deep floor plans, it's not possible to get natural light everywhere, but certainly, you know, even the building code contemplates that we need to provide adequate daylight to all habitable spaces. So it gets pretty tricky if you try and put it all in a basement. It's really not appropriate for human health, comfort. But yeah, if you start from first principles, it's going to really help with your lighting plan.
You can also further sort of make the most of the natural light on your site by reflective light. So if you're trying to get light deeper in a plan, use light reflective surfaces, or designing your floor plate so that the light can flow through the space. So you don't have walls or doorways closing themselves, spaces off to where the light source is, even if it's through another room. So you can definitely, and use things like obscured glass deeper in the plan to not block that light where it's possible. So it doesn't have to be the first source. You can take it right to the, you know, deeper in the plan.
I think that's really great advice for a lot of our interior students as well, who may not have control of the building at that first stage, but there's so much we can do to capture that natural light and, you know, bring it as far into that building as possible, or orientating the programs within that interior space to really capture the light when people are going to use it the most. So yeah, really great, Patina and Bonnie.
Andrew Lamb wanted to ask specifically about one of the slides where you had the light bulb facing down. It was called wall light. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The one that was
the
exposed.
Restaurant one?
The breathe wall light, the little angle. Yeah,
that's the one. So he would like to know, would this sort of light create glare?
If you like a naked bulb like that, a clear glass one will give off glare. So it's about positioning it in the right spot in the plan and the right height. But also you can change that bulb with an opaque bulb, with a bulb that blocks the bottom half of it. So there's an operability in the bulb that you can actually choose as well.
I thought you could even change, when I looked at that, the orientation of the cleat. Like you could have it like flat wall upwards, like above eye height. Like there's so much versatility in that simple design. It's really quite beautiful.
All right, so there's quite a few more. Let's power through them as much as we can. Next one would be from Lara. So with the image, there was a slide where you had exposed cords. How do you get around safety rules and regulations with exposed and hanging light cables, particularly around rental properties?
Sure. That particular image was from a single residential home of a set designer. And in that instance, it wasn't such an issue. You know, they were of a height that was safe for any little ones coming in. But ultimately, it really is, it depends on the actual application. So ordinarily, you know, when we've got exposed cabling in commercial applications, it will be clipped to the wall and run in straight runs to the source, but can be redirected as appropriate. But particularly in that instance, in a private residence, you can control it according to the users rather than the public.
If it's owner occupied, but if it's rental, then yeah.
But if it's rental, it's sort of a different situation. But we don't tend to design projects that are often rented.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. So another question from Susie. Patina, you spoke about finishing coatings for lighting. Which ones would you avoid? powder coat, chrome, etc.?
Yeah, so we do not use chrome at all because of the toxic chemicals required, and especially in like some areas where chrome platings are done, there's little controls on what is done with the waste of those chemicals. Electroplating also uses a number of chemicals, which is something we like to avoid. So that's our second least favourite. PVD is another finish which it does require a lot of energy because the finish is baked on at a really high temperature, but it is more durable than electroplating, and it doesn't use those same chemicals to make the bond of the two metals. It's like a metal coating that is bonded onto the metal base. So looking forward, we hope that if we can use renewable energy, PVD is a really great coating option, which will supersede electroplating and chrome plating. And then, but then just the raw material is the number one preference. So raw brass, raw aluminium, aluminium, raw steel, raw copper, just taking that material in its natural form. Same with timbers. If we don't need to apply paint to it, we don't apply paint. I have heard of technology, waterborne plating, which is actually an old method that may re-emerge, hopefully, as electroplating maybe gets more expensive as governments start to tax the use of those chemicals.
Perfect. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Susie. Just another one, a good one here, because you're talking about local suppliers and sustainable sourcing sustainably. Christina Roots would love to know whether you found good local made in Melbourne lighting companies that you work with. You don't have to mention them if you don't want to, but if you have favorites, they're interested.
There's a lot of great little, there's a lot of small furniture companies that make wonderful lighting. But then there are some great Australian lighting companies that have been around a long time. At the moment, we're working with Ambience to create these custom light fixtures. So they don't do a lot of manufacturing locally, but they are up for that change in the market and changing their products. So questioning how their products are made and making them better. It is challenging sometimes to reach the target of building affordable multi-residential design, to go 100% local fixtures. We just don't have that price edge in our local manufacturing at the moment for your really sort of more generic fixtures. But in saying that, there are some great options. So I've got the list a lot, but I don't know.
Cool. So there's one question about, in the question slide, Michael, if you don't mind popping that up again, just the last one.
Yeah.
Linda Robinson's asking just about the lighting around her face or under her chin, and just what, she's hoping the question makes sense, and whether you could talk about the choice of lighting there in that.
This one?
She said in the question slide, the lighting on the lady's face.
Yeah, it looks like reflected light as well, which is interesting. So Patina actually spoke about this particular fitting earlier, where it's a custom, almost like a gooseneck shape LED that creates a pool sized appropriately for the table. But our model, Maddie here, actually has a book open. And so it's reflecting off the paper onto her shirt, which is reflecting onto her face. So this is the power of reflected light we were talking about. So it's not some fancy trick where we've got LED in the table surface. It's actually the power of reflective light.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's true. You're talking about the ones that were over in transport. Yeah.
Yeah, you can't quite see them at this angle, but it's
there's
that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just see it if you zoom in, if you focus on that.
above the E. You
Yeah.
can see the top of it just. This is
Yeah.
like our photography too, where we've turned the lights up as high as they can go to get the photo. So you wouldn't have them this high when you're actually having dinner there.
Oh, no. I've been for dinner there. It's actually quite moody and dim, and yeah, it's lovely. Susan Davey has another question. I'm thinking of having lights that have a rope type cord twisted around a stick and then hanging down over my bed instead of bedside table lights. Can you see any issues with this? DIY.
I don't profess to have read AS 3000, the electrical Australian standard, so probably can't comment too much about how that works. But we've done sort of similar things in that we've used flex cable, like a cloth flex, where we've looped it up and clipped it up at the rows so that it can be flexibly moved onto a hook later on, or just elevated depending on what's going on in that space. So we've done things that are similar, but without knowing much more, I'm not sure I can comment.
Yeah,
it sounds interesting.
Definitely, yeah, check our regulations for that one. Susan, thanks for your question. Jasmina would love to know, she's a student with us. Hi, Jasmina. Do you have any tips on steering clients towards more ethical choices? If they already have a vision which is less environmentally friendly, but is less expensive in terms of immediate cost for them?
Well, there's definitely a duty, I think, that we have as designers to try and educate our clients toward more appropriate pathways for their design outcomes. It's really front of mind, of course, in light of the latest IPCC report and needing to really create these kind of net zero pathways for all of our projects. So I think have that discussion. I mean, that's the first piece of advice, just have that discussion. Well, actually, first piece of advice, don't have that discussion. Put it in the design first.
I think that's a great way forward. I think put it in the design first.
Put it in the design first. But, if it comes up, stand by, your education, by what you've learned about these materials, but running through Patina's checklist to help understand, what is the most appropriate way of going about it, and then sharing that with your clients. That's a gift. And they've come to you as a designer with all your expertise. So it actually speaks to your integrity to be voicing this and educating them.
Absolutely. If you don't, still, it's your opportunity to voice it. If you don't, then
opportunity lost.
Yeah. Pierre Sack had a question about, so you've written, Pierre Sack, sorry if I've interpreted this wrong, but you said means of plants can be in a basement level. When I read it, you were talking about Patina and Bonnie, Bonnie, it was your slides, plants without much light underground. So I suppose Pierre Sack is asking if you can put a plant underground and have it flourish.
Yeah, well, it's really going to depend on the plants. I've definitely heard of some pretty amazing things going on. Does fungus count? Mushrooms don't need any. There's definitely ways you can go about it. Some incredible examples, and it's just going to limit what kind of plants you have. And in those applications, I would be getting specialist advice. You can use these broad spectrum grow lights to give you, the best chance, the best fighting chance. But there are variables. I spoke earlier about, matching the particular species to avoid, certain pests. There's biodiversity in there, the height, the beam spread on the actual foliage. It has to have a certain density right onto the leaves. So it's really, the answer is yes, but it depends.
depends on the plant, depends on, yeah, how much is low light. I'm very sorry, everyone. It's we're over time and we have to wrap this up.
Yeah, so what I might do before I wrap it up, Smita, do you want to just run through some of the course offerings and then before we wrap everything up, just quickly?
Sure. Super duper. Quickly, so we have, while Michael's putting that up on the slides, we've got 2 courses that are accredited. So the certificate for in interior decoration and then the diploma in interior design. If you have questions or if you just want to know a little bit more in detail, I'm very happy to take a call with you anytime.
Smita's lovely, so feel free to give her a call.
I love that you had to say that, Michael. If Trace and Ash could share my meeting link in the chat, you're very welcome to save it and book a call at anytime that suits you around your work hours. Otherwise, for all the attendees here today, we've especially giving you a nice 40% off the short courses as well. That will be emailed out to you. So that's only for attendees today. Otherwise, thanks so much for attending. Follow us and Breathe on your socials if you haven't already. And look forward to our next webinar.
Yeah, I'd personally like to thank Smita. Thank you for your help. And Bonnie, Patina, you're just absolutely wonderful this evening. We've learnt so much. On a personal note, I absolutely love the Paramount building. I love the little coffee shop down there. I'm dying to stay in one of those rooms one time. So I'm really excited to check out that light. But thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.